This man earned more per day than a skilled carpenter in medieval London. He could only work at night. No tavern would let him sit near other customers, and when his clothes wore out, he burned them. Before we show you what he did for that money, you need to see the competition. Because medieval England ran on 5 jobs that nobody chose and everyone depended on. And this man's job made every single one of them look civilized. Every great city in medieval England ran on labor so dark that the people performing it were designed to be invisible. The lords who feasted in halls like this never once thought about what happened to their waste. Someone thought about it for them every night with a bucket and a rope, and was gone before the city woke up. We start at the top of the worst and work our way down. The fuller is where this list begins. The fuller cleaned raw wool cloth by stamping barefoot in vats of stale human urine collected from public latrines. The ammonia cleaned the fibers and slowly ate the skin off his feet. After years in the vats, the skin on a fuller's feet went permanently soft and white. He walked home through streets where people moved away from him before he was close enough to speak. The smell did not wash out at the end of a shift. It settled into his hair and his clothes and the back of his throat, and it was still there in the morning. A urine collector walked the streets every morning, delivering full barrels to the fulling vats. He told people, when asked, that he did something else. Water-powered mills eventually replaced the footworkers. The men who had stood in urine for a living were replaced by a machine that never needed to go home. If standing in urine sounds bad, the tanner would like a word. The tanner converted raw animal hides into leather by submerging them in pits of dog excrement mixed with water. The bacteria broke down the hide's protein structure. The tanner's hands spent most of each day submerged alongside them. The open sores on a tanner's hands never fully healed because he returned to the pits every morning. The chemical exposure stained his skin permanently brown to the wrist, and that color never faded. Tanneries were required to operate outside most city walls because the smell carried half a mile on a still day. The tanner, delivering finished leather through the gate, was expected to leave before his presence reminded anyone of how the leather was made. The men who collected dog excrement from city streets and delivered it to the tanneries left no personal record. They worked in complete anonymity and were essential to every shoe and saddle in England. Below the tanner, in almost every measure, was the leech collector. She waded into cold ponds with bare legs and waited while the leeches attached. She remained in the water while they fed because pulling them early damaged the creatures and reduced their sale price. A leech attached by pressing its front sucker against the skin and releasing a substance that kept the blood flowing while it fed. She would feel the first cold pressure of contact and then look down and count. The apothecary who bought her leeches sold them to physicians at a profit that covered his building and his reputation. The leech collector who paid for those leeches in blood bought bread and went back to the pond. The physician who applied those leeches in warm candlelit rooms would never meet the woman who collected them in cold water before dawn. That distance was one of the systems medieval England ran on. Below the leech collector was a man who cut your hair this morning and was going to amputate your leg this afternoon. The barber's pole tells you what happened in the shop. The red stripe is blood. The white stripe is the bandage that followed it. The patient was held down by 2 men and told to bite on leather. The surgeon cut as fast as his hands allowed because speed was the only mercy he could offer. The patient was conscious for every second of it. The bone saw required a steady hand and the ability to keep working through sounds that most people spend their lives trying to forget. The medieval barber-surgeon heard those sounds every working day. The mortality rate for medieval amputation was high enough that refusing the surgeon was sometimes the rational choice. The ones who kept practicing had found a way to know this without letting it slow them down. Tooth extraction was performed with iron forceps clamped to the root with no preparation. The patient was told to hold still. Barber-surgeons developed exceptional grip strength over a career. Their patients contributed significantly to this. At the end of every working day, the barber-surgeon cleaned his instruments and laid them out for tomorrow. He was also the man who had cut your hair this morning. Even the barber-surgeon had something the next man did not. He was allowed to be seen in public during working hours. The executioner drew regular crown pay and maintained his own tools. He lived in a city where every person he passed already knew exactly who he was. Before every execution, he knelt before the watching crowd and begged forgiveness from the condemned for what he was about to do. He performed this ritual at every execution for a career that could span 30 years. A botched beheading could require 3 or 4 additional strikes. The crowd's fury fell on the man holding the axe, and he could not leave the scaffold until the work was done. Some executions required multiple attempts, and he stayed for all of them. Drawing and quartering was performed on men who were still alive. The executioner disemboweled the condemned while they still breathed and burned their organs in front of them. He performed every step himself. After every execution, he climbed the gate tower stairs with the head and mounted it on an iron spike. He came back to maintain those displays regularly. This was also in his contract. The executioner's children walked to market in a city where every person knew exactly who their father was. They had not chosen this. They carried it for the length of their childhood without anyone asking whether it was fair. And below the executioner, at the very bottom of everything on this list, was the man we showed you at the start. Now we arrive at the Gong Farmer. Every other job on this list was performed in daylight. His was legally forbidden before dusk or after dawn. Beneath every privy in medieval England sat a cesspit holding months of accumulated human waste. Beneath a great castle, it could be 12 feet deep. The Gong Farmer climbed down into it. He lowered himself into complete darkness on a rope with a bucket. The smell struck him before his feet touched anything, and it was not something any human brain has a category for. The methane from decomposing waste in an enclosed stone chamber had no smell and gave no warning. A Gong Farmer, overcome by it, stopped moving and did not call for the rope. His colleagues above pulled, and sometimes the rope came up empty. Between operations, the cart moved through empty streets, and the Gong Farmers walked alongside it in silence. Every watchman they passed turned his face away. The cart had to clear the city gate before the first baker opened his shutters. The contents were sold to farms outside the walls as fertilizer, and somebody profited from it. The Gong Farmer, who had spent the night standing in it, was at the very end of that profit chain. Richard the Raker drowned in 1326 in the cesspit beneath a London privy when the boards gave way. His death was recorded in city documents as a public record. His occupation was listed alongside his name. His working clothes were burned at the end of every season because washing could not resolve what had soaked into them. He lived in lodgings because no landlord who had seen those clothes would rent to him. Gong Farmers were not refused entry to establishments. They were made to understand through the silent redistribution of every person in the room that one corner was theirs. Most had stopped noticing this arrangement years earlier. Some Gong Farmers became wealthy. They owned equipment and employed others and died with property. Their children still could not enter most of the buildings those assets were worth more than. Gong farming was a formal civic contract with legal working hours and designated routes and penalties for dawn violations. The city administered it seriously and then went about its day and pretended none of it was happening. The Tower of London required Gong Farmers. The Palace of Westminster required Gong Farmers. Every great monastery in England required them. None of these buildings mentioned them in any account of what they were used for. What these men left behind is almost nothing, and that is itself the point. They exist as occupational surnames, Fuller and Tanner and Walker, and almost nothing else. They appear in court documents only when one of them drowned or fell somewhere he should not have been. Those surnames are still common across England today. Every English person carrying one of them carries the trade of an ancestor who did work the city preferred to know nothing about. The job the Gong Farmer did still exists. Modern sewer workers wear full protective equipment and earn considerably more. They are still not something most people discuss over dinner. Every person in medieval England who used a privy was connected to the Gong Farmer who came at night. The city built its entire social structure around pretending that connection was not there. Every morning in a medieval English city, the Gong Farmer's cart cleared the gate before the first baker opened his shutters. The city woke up and had no memory of how it had gotten that way. If this stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe to Daily Medieval Annals. Medieval England built cathedrals and wrote the common law and produced great art. It also needed men to descend into the dark every night. It made very sure those men understood the difference between being necessary and being valued.